We are now going to deal with, I think, one of the most difficult texts of the Bible, if not, of the book of Daniel, certainly. Let me just erase this. Okay, maybe I will leave this here. I will erase that. Is this Daniel scholar, George McGrady Price. I don't know if you heard about his name. No? No? Price. Talking about Daniel 11, he says this is extremely difficult to interpret. Okay? Difficult text. And there are at least two main reasons why it is, I would say three. Three main reasons why it is difficult. First reason is that there are so many details, right? So many, great amount of details. And the second is in Daniel 11, the language is coded, and I'm taking this actually qualification from Daniel scholar from Wilson. You know, wrote a commentary, just came out. This lady wrote a commentary, and she says that one of the problem of Daniel 11 is that this is a coded language, and you need to decode. You know, it's kind of he doesn't say things, you know, bluntly. I mean, he uses imageries. Okay. And when you look at the history of interpretation of Daniel 11, you get very confused, because it's incoherent, it's contradictory, and there are so many different interpretations. Okay, doesn't help. So, what is the main issue? So, what I'm going to do for the moment, before we go into trying to understand Daniel 11 the way I've come to understand, I'm going to share with you what, you know, my personal journey in this chapter. Before we go there, let me just first of all make a little review of the problem. You know, just see what happened, right? So, what is the thesis which is really behind that? So we have what we call the Maccabean thesis. You know, are you reading a book here?
This is your book. I try to follow along.
It's not in the book. What I'm telling you, it's not in the book. It's outside of the book, right? So just listen to me, right? All right. Maccabean thesis. There are a few things which are in the book, but I said already before you were not here. What I'm sharing with you here has never been published. Okay, so it's not in my book. It's not in other books. So it's new, and so we need to pay attention here. Maccabean thesis. Since more or less 1890, about that time, right? Seems to me. Until that time, the book of Daniel and Daniel 11, right? The book of Daniel in general was considered written in the 6th century, right? And around that time, there had been a shift under the influence of rationalism and, you know, all kinds of movements, currents, and they began to reconsider that, and so to, in fact, adopt even the idea that Daniel 11, this is where we are, right? Daniel 11, okay, is nothing but the history of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. That is, wars, between the northern army, northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom. Okay, this is why you have king of the south and king of the north. So they need to make sense of it, right? So they're saying, you know, that after Alexander, I'm repeating something I already said, but after Alexander the Great, you know, when he died, very young, you know, his empire was divided into, you know, 4 generals, okay? And you had particularly 2 generals, you know. One took the north, more or less the north, and the other one took more or less the south. The north, that is Palestine, Mesopotamia, a bit of the north, and then the south was Egypt, essentially, and a bit of Africa, okay? So they are saying, basically, this is it. What we have here in Daniel 11, it's this history, but the focus, the reason for that is Antiochus Epiphanes. Sorry. Or Antiochus the Fourth. Okay, who was, of course, one of the kings of the Seleucids of the north. Okay, and according to, if you read the book of Maccabees, right, tells you a story of Jews who called themselves the Maccabees, resisted the Seleucids, and especially Antiochus Epiphanes, who invaded Palestine and entered the temple and didn't destroy the temple, but spoiled it and so forth. And suddenly one family, the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, stood up. They revolted, okay? And they fought against them. And there was even a story in connection to that with the oil which was missing for a moment, and there was a miracle, and therefore, since that time, Jews celebrate that victory against Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And this is this, I don't know if you heard about that, the feast of Hanukkah, right? That's Hanukkah, which is by the way, the feast which is related to the Feast of Light, okay? Christmas, around the same time, okay? So that's what we have. So that's the background of this whole thing. So what the scholars, critical scholars, are saying is that this, what we have here in Daniel 11 is the story of this conflict between the Seleucids, the king of the north, and which are several kings, by the way, and the king of the south, the Ptolemies, Egypt. And there were, by the way, there were some marriages between them and so forth. And Antiochus Epiphanes is within that whole story. Okay, so what I say, so this is taking place. This story is taking place in the 2nd century BC. This story, right? It's 2nd century BC. Okay. So what? Porphyry, I have already talked about him, so I'm just kind of repeating here. Porphyry, this agnostic Neoplatonician philosopher, Porphyry. All right, from the I think the 3rd century somehow. He suggested, it's more than suggested, he actually started saying, no, it's not the case. It's not. This is what I'm talking about right now has been proposed. This is a suggestion. This is an idea by Porphyry, which the people, the critical scholars in the 19th century are embracing now. Before them, of course, Porphyry was the one who had initiated that idea. Okay. Now, this whole idea of Daniel being written in the 2nd century, and all Antiochus Epiphanes, they say little horn actually is Antiochus Epiphanes. This whole idea which you find in Daniel 7, which you find in Daniel 8, I mean in the interpretations, actually starts in Daniel 11. Critical scholars, the whole idea, this is the cradle of this whole chapter 11 of Daniel. Don't start with chapter 7. All the critical scholars are saying, because of Daniel 11, what we have in Daniel 7, Daniel 11, you have this back and forth movement, these wars between, again, the north and the south, and then sometime down the road, Antiochus Epiphanes will appear, and then he will do all these things. And then when you put Antiochus Epiphanes here, and then you have to go, when you then interpret from Daniel 11, you go to Daniel 8, and then you go to Daniel 7, because of parallels. You will see that the king of the north and the little horn has the same features, does the same thing. So what do? Antiochus Epiphanes is in Daniel 11, therefore it is in Daniel 7, therefore it is in Daniel 8, and then the whole book of Daniel is actually determined by Daniel 11. Critical scholars, they say that. All started, that's the beginning of the whole theory, chapter 11. So it's a very important study that we are doing right now, when we consider the critical discussion. Okay? Now, the irony is, just realize the irony here a little bit, is that conservative scholars, including our scholars, until now, last few years, it's very fresh, we are doing history, I believe, in the interpretation of Daniel 11. Just be aware of that. When you look at the interpretation, what do we have? All critical scholars, they are saying Daniel 11 is parallel Daniel 8. We will see that in a minute. And Daniel 8 parallels Daniel 7, very clearly, same language, same. Therefore, this is Antiochus Epiphanes here in Daniel 7, little horn, Daniel 8, little horn. Consistent. Critical scholars are consistent. Conservative scholars, Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel 7, they erase it. Right? Little horn, it's exactly like in Daniel 11. So they say, no, that's not possible. They say, no, that little horn is the church. I mean, I'm saying that, I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about Adventists. This, even from the time of the church fathers, from the time of the reforms, Luther, Calvin, and even Jews. Well, the little horn is the church. That's what they were saying. The little horn is the church. For a long time they ignored chapter 11, but now they are saying Daniel 11, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, Daniel 11. So if this is Antiochus Epiphanes, this is not the church, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, this is Antiochus Epiphanes. So what do the conservative scholars, including the SDA Bible commentary? They erase here, this is the church. They erase here, this is the church. And they keep it here. Do you see the problem? We've got a problem. Are you okay?
It's a big problem.
All right, it's a big problem, right? Okay. So that's what we are going to address. Right? Just that you tremble a little bit, if it is possible, and then we'll see where we should go for that. But at least realize the problem. Now, there are other problems. So in other words, I'm going to give you a number of problems. First problem, most important problem, about the story, the history of Antiochus Epiphanes, the history of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. First problem, we want to do history, is the sources about. You want to know the information. You need the sources. Where are the sources? There are only two. There is I'm going to put this on the board. We could say the one source is Polybius, and the second one is the Book of Maccabees, which is discussable. We'll talk one. Who is Polybius? Polybius is a general in army, general of army, so a military person. Is a Roman, a Latin historian, who comes from the army background. Okay, and he started writing history. A good historian. Okay, and so it's the time, of course, of Rome. You know, Roman. So he wrote, took information, he did inquiries. So he wrote about the history of the Maccabees, the Ptolemies, and the Seleucids, which is, of course, 2nd century BC. Polybius. And the second is Maccabees, of course, which also talks about the history of Antiochus Epiphanes. All right? There is a difference, however, between the two, because this one is referring to refers to the book of Daniel, uses, for instance, the expression abomination of desolation, which is taken from Daniel, and applies to Antiochus Epiphanes. So we are saying, well, for Maccabees, he is applying Daniel to his own history, his time. Okay. Well, if you read the text, I read it very carefully. If you read the text, you will see that he is not even referring to Daniel. He's using that phrase in a midrashic sense. Just as you would say, well, this is an abomination of desolation. Doesn't mean that just now, when, for instance, I surprise a student, cheating, and a student who is, a pastor who is supposed, and I would say, this is the abomination of desolation. No, you are not. Someone is going, oh, by the way, you are fulfilling the prophecy. You see what I'm saying? So that's he's not even referring to Daniel. He's saying that he's using that phrase of abomination of desolation, applying to his time, because for him, Antiochus Epiphanes was like an abomination of desolation. But he was not saying that this is a fulfillment of prophecy. He's not even referring to Daniel. Because I'm saying that because in other passages, he refers to Daniel. But here he's just saying abomination of desolation without specifically. So I understand then, like it's like a midrash. It's like a midrashic or a historical reference to that event without really thinking, oh, I'm fulfilling the prophecy. Well, that's all we have here. So we are not so sure. So, but here at least we have the history, some history of Antiochus Epiphanes here. But it's a history which is written by zealots, people who are biased, who are violent, who have a philosophy of his has nothing to do with the book of Daniel. Daniel has nothing to do with the violence of the Maccabees. You understand what I'm saying? It's completely different style, completely different ideals. Okay. Now, what is interesting, by the way, the expression abomination of desolation, which is taken from Daniel, right? Daniel 8, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. This expression is Daniel, invented by Daniel itself. This expression is used also where in the Bible, besides these three texts? Jesus. In Matthew 24, right? And what does it say it applies to?
The Romans invading Jerusalem.
The Romans invading Jerusalem, or
Destroying the temple.
destruction of the temple. This is the Romans. They are saying, or something else.
The end of the world.
The end of the world. Okay, we'll come back to that. So in other words, he takes that phrase and he says this phrase is a prophecy. So he refers to Daniel. As the prophet Daniel says, he's recognized. He refers, it's not like Maccabees, who says, well, just me taking it in the abstract. He said, as Daniel said. So, and he's saying to them, Because the reason he does that, in a way, there have been some scholars working on that. We'll have to erase the parasites we have sometimes in the in the radio here. All right. So okay. So what we have here? So Jesus. What does Jesus do? Because there were some people at the time of Jesus who were saying, you know, who believed that, you know, with the Maccabean tradition. Because Maccabee was saying something that, you know, after that you may develop an idea. You understand what's happening? You know, Maccabees were saying something without really thinking that this is really the fulfillment of prophecy. But since you have in the Maccabees, and they celebrate the feast of Hanukkah, you have this in the New Testament. John refers to the feast of Hanukkah. Jesus was celebrating the feast of Hanukkah, the feast of Maccabee. Okay, so you may have had some Jews who are thinking that the history of the Maccabees were fulfilling the prophecy. What did Jesus say about this? No. This refers to a future event. He was actually contradicting this thing. So even if you take in consideration Jesus' testimony, Jesus' interpretation, it has nothing to do with Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Jesus. That's it. Should be enough if you are a Christian. Right? All right, apparently it's not. But anyway, so that's where we are right now, right? So that you can see the problem. So we have these two sources, and then when you compare these two sources, which are really the two main sources, they are contradictory. Even here in Polybius says something, next chapter he says something, he's not very well informed. Maccabees says something which contradicts what Polybius is saying. So very small, very little source, very few sources about this event. So if I have very few sources, and I read Daniel 11, what is happening? I can say, all right, this refers to that, this refers to that, and then what does it refer to here? And I don't see evidence in Polybius or in Maccabees. So what will I do? I will invent. That's precisely what is happening.
For sure.
No. To tell you the truth, I sat at I'm just giving you my own personal testimony. I sat at a seminar which was given by Goldingay, one of the great commentators of the book of Daniel. And the other one, it was Delcourt, a French commentator.
So it's called
I sat a whole seminar on Daniel 11. You know what it was? Science fiction. Honestly, he was inventing things. I said, well, you know where...
That's how you contribute to the field.
They contribute. So I said, well, what do you see that? He said, well, but you know, critical mind. Critical mind, you invent things. Imagination. You see, so that is what. So what is happening now? You know what is happening here? Now they don't find here. They find it in Daniel 11, and so because it is in Daniel 11, this is the history. And because you understand what's happening? Daniel 11, you don't know if he's really referring to Antiochus Epiphanes. So what do? I mean, it's circular reasoning. That's the problem. And they recognize that, but that's all we have. They recognize. What I'm saying is not something we are laughing on. They themselves feel uncomfortable about because this is fact.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the problem we are having. Okay. There are other problems. There are other problems. When you look at the interpretations, the history of interpretation, whether it is critical scholars or conservative scholars, holy scholars or unholy scholars, someone is saying this means that, another person comes and says no, this means that. You have this even in our commentaries, for clear.
Yeah.
And even within the same commentary, you see that this means that, but this also means that. Actually, it means two, which is very helpful. And you can see that very clearly. Well, this I can show you. I give you some examples in my writing. Very clear example. This means that. This is a literal application, but this is also a spiritual. Actually, you can have both. So everyone is happy in that confusion. All right? So that's the problem we are having. I mean, right? Okay. So that's the problem of interpretations. We are confused. And the layperson, I mean, scholars we can survive because we are used to lies. Okay, we say, well, it's okay, we survive with that. But layperson read that and it's very confused. You see, there's a problem. Okay, so that's our problem. Okay, now, some people say this is to be applied, this is literal, and the same thing says, no, this is spiritual. Okay, so it's very confusing. Now, there is something else connected to that. Another problem. I call it in connection to what I call is hermeneutic of covenant. Let me explain. Hermeneutic of covenant. When you read the Old and New Testament and you realize the plan of salvation, what is happening? When Jesus came, okay, the cross, and this lesson we are learning in Daniel 9, the sacrifices were cancelled because they were fulfilled in Jesus Christ. I'm saying something you understand. Okay. And after all, whether you want it or not, you cannot do the sacrifices anymore because there are no temples. Okay? So some people, for instance, even some people among Christians, even some Adventists I've seen, they want to do the Jewish festivals. Fine, it's nice. Right? We can sing, we can dance, and we have the blessing. So that's fine. So I tell them, okay, you want to do Jewish festival? Fine, I'm with you. I did the Jewish festivals most of my life. What tradition are you going to follow? I'm talking to Christians. Which Jewish festival were you, because you have several Jewish traditions. Are you going to have a Ashkenazic tradition, Sephardic traditions, Yemenite traditions, Bnei Israel traditions? You have so many ways of doing the festivals. I know they want to be pure. And they are Christians. So what they are saying? Well, biblical. Okay, do the sacrifices then. Now they are in trouble. They cannot do the sacrifice. Of course, why? So you see, there is a dilemma. There is a little bit of a problem here. And so they can find all kinds of reason to justify their gusto for the feast. They need to find something. So, and then some people, I think, we have to do the festival. And they become more Jews than the most fanatic Jew in doing the festival. I've seen that. Because I've discussed with some Messianic Jews, who are not Jews, by the way, and therefore they are better than the other Jews. They are so fanatic. They celebrate the new moon. They celebrate everything that even an Orthodox Jew doesn't do. They are more pure than the Jews. Right? But the point I'm saying basically that way is that there is a very profound contradiction. You understand? But Jesus came, sacrifice. All the festivals, they have been fulfilled in Jesus Christ. So there is no more the same imperative. You can do them if you went. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the festival. I mean, anytime you can rejoice, go for it. Okay? But I'm saying don't turn this into a dogmatic, truth here, because then you get in contradiction with the essence of Christianity, which is telling you that Christ has come, he has fulfilled that. No, and if you don't do the sacrifice, by the way, biblically speaking, your feast, Passover, if you want to, has no value. No lamb, no sacrifice from the biblical point of view. Well, you can do this Passover for other reasons, but don't say that you are going to do it according to biblical law. It's not right. Okay? You understand the point? You understand the contradiction we are having here. Okay. So, the reason I'm saying that is that there is a profound contradiction in interpretation of Daniel 11 here, when it comes to interpretation. I mean, in our interpretation. Because we are saying this. Well, we very often we interpret the Daniel 11. Some conservative people, for instance, and this is more familiar to you, and we are saying, well, this applies since for instance this text is referring to, for instance, to the how shall I say, to the promised land, all right, or to the tzevi, that is the precious, the tzevi, which is the promised land. The word tzevi, I will come back to that. I'm saying that for the moment. I will write it on the board in a minute, but just for the moment, get the message. The word tzevi, right, which is a word, a technical word, which refers to the promised land, to the place where you have the temple. Okay, it's a word which refers to, Jerusalem. Right? It says that, so we have the word tzevi in the book, in Daniel 11. It says that this power is coming and enters the promised land and crushes God's people. And so, who are these God? And what is this promised land we are talking about? You see, we are after Christ here. I mean, if we understand that as a prophecy projected into the future. All right, as conservative scholars, that's the way we understand it. So this refers to a future event, all right? And we're saying that this power is coming into the promised land, into the Palestine, okay? And into Palestine, and then it goes at the end of the road, and sieges the city of Jerusalem, enters the temple, and there is a crushing of the temple. Right? What temple we are talking about? Where is the temple? It's after Christ. Where is the temple? What language? What is he referring to? After Christ, what is it referring to? You have to interpret spiritually. You cannot interpret. You cannot say this is the temple, the second temple. People, you cannot talk about. You cannot talk about the temple which there is no more temple today. You understand? So after Christ, that's when we interpret prophecy. We cannot interpret prophecy the way, for instance, in the Old Testament. When the Old Testament, Jeremiah says, you will come back to the promised land after 70 years. Literal application. The effect applies to Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? But if Daniel comes, and then suddenly he begins with, of course, Jeremiah, as we have indicated that in Daniel 9, and then he jumps from there, and then sees Christ and sees something else in the far future beyond Jesus Christ. This is no longer, the return of the Jews, for instance, to Israel. You understand? So what is ironical, among many conservative scholars, whether they are here or elsewhere, being very precise, as you can see. What is really ironical is that on one hand they are insisting, saying that now Israel is spiritual. Israel, when Paul speaks about Israel of God and so forth, what is he referring to? God's people. When the book of Revelation is talking about Israel, the 12 tribes, in the book of Revelation, what is it? It's God's people. So, okay, we recognize that. And then when it comes to, then suddenly we are saying, he goes to Palestine, he goes to Jerusalem, and then he's going to destroy the Jews and be fighting against the Muslims. Do you see the inconsistency as far as methodology is concerned? Mm-hmm. It is either literal or it is spiritual. That's the problem. We are mixing up spiritual and literal, and therefore it's inconsistent. Now let me just give you another issue, more precise. In our traditional interpretation, when we read Daniel 11 until verse 39, we are saying this is all what? Literal. Okay, and so we use, of course, Antiochus Epiphanes, we go with Ptolemy, Seleucids, and Rome, and at the end we have the church. That's the traditional, yeah, as they evaluate. And then in verse 40, suddenly it is spiritual. But now, what is interesting when you read verse 40, you will see that later. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. What is this him? Let me ask you that question. Before you had the north attacks the south attacks the north attacks the south attacks the north. I will come back to this paradigm in a minute. But now in verse 40, I say, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. What is this him? What?
Someone.
No, it's not someone, it's precise.
The king of the north?
Yeah, it can be only, yes, because the king of the south fights only the king of the north. That's all the time.
Yeah.
Attacks him. So we just talked about the king of the north before, right? In verse 39, it was the king of the north. And then the king of the south, it attacks him, that is the king of the north. So the one before is spiritual, is literal, and this one suddenly is spiritual. Do you see the contradiction? There is a problem, okay? Now, that's what, I'm just giving you an example of contradictions, but there are more than that. I'm taking the most perhaps visible. Literal, spiritual, literal, we are confused, okay? And sometimes they are saying, well, this one is both literal and spiritual, which doesn't help. I mean, you will see that. I'm sure if you are aware of that, honestly, it is problematic. Now, so that's one of the problems, okay? Now, by the way, before we go a little bit further and give another argument, still within that context of what I call hermeneutic of covenant, I just want to, mention something. Is the fact that when you something which is really inconsistent. On one hand, many Christians are saying, when you talk about Israel, this is spiritual Israel, okay? But then they read Daniel 11 and they apply this to modern Israel. Suddenly it becomes literal. So is it spiritual or Israel? Is it spiritual or is it? See, so the dispensationalist people and some even Adventists, and they go with the Muslim thing because they say they say this is Palestine, therefore Muslims and so forth. Okay, so anyway, by the way, in that particular context, you remember what Jesus said to the Samaritan woman? When the Samaritan woman was wondering about the Messiah and about the Jews, but she said, and then Jesus said himself to the salvation comes from the Jews, right? In that particular context, and what was the argument of the Samaritan woman? What was this? She said,
"This is the place."
All right, this is the place. This is here, Jerusalem. And so, what did Jesus?
Not on this mountain.
Right. What is Jesus' answer?
Not on this mountain.
Where is the place now? From the time of Jesus? What? It will come one day when there is no more place. It's completely spiritual. It's completely, outside. So you cannot, on one hand, embrace that truth from Jesus that, we are no longer determined by a people. We are no longer determined by a place for our salvation. But we are now, covenant has exploded beyond Israel, including Israel, of course, but exploded beyond the tribe, exploded beyond the space. It's universal. That's what Jesus did, okay? You cannot say that on one hand and keep interpreting as if nothing happened, as if really, Palestine is still, Jerusalem and the temple is still going on. See, there is a contradiction. All right. Now, having said that, and then we'll have a moment. Just one. This is the time now for the questions, or?
We kind of asked that, so.
Oh, okay. Well, so let me keep going then on this matter. Let me just finish that. Just finish that. Do you realize? And then I will have a time for questions. What is interesting? We are actually the whole all these things is just for us to realize that there is a problem with this thesis of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Contradictions, internal contradictions, few sources. There is also a theological problem. I call it hermeneutic of covenant when you consider the covenant with God. But there is another problem. It's not biblical. What do I mean by that? You have nothing in the book of Daniel, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, nowhere there is reference to the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. This is the only place.
No reference to the term?
The Ptolemies and the Seleucids. This whole history of the Antiochus Epiphanes and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids is nowhere. It's only in 911, according to the critical scholars. You don't have it mentioned in elsewhere in the Old Testament, elsewhere in the New Testament.
The New Testament, yeah.
Nothing. And add to that, there is not one rabbinic source. Add to that, there is not one church father until Porphyry. There is nothing before Porphyry, nothing, which speaks about, no source, which speaks about the Ptolemies and Seleucids and Antiochus Epiphanes in connection to Daniel 11. It's an invention coming from that. So much so, I have some source here. I have, research on that. There is a Jew, the name of Abarbanel, who, because there is no sources, he says, well, there is nothing in the in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, there is no reference to the Ptolemies and Seleucids, no reference to Antiochus Epiphanes, nothing in connection with Daniel 11. So he said, well, the only I found is a Christian. So it started with Abarbanel, a little later, when among the Jews, and then and so he's just referring to a source. Here, I can read you this whole thing. I mean, I don't. This is quite an interesting text. Here, yeah, I have it right here. Abarbanel from the 15th century, so it's quite late. He says, concerning Daniel's dream of wars between the southern king and the northern king, so he's trying to interpret Daniel 11. The rabbinic commentators spoke falsely because they did not know the history of those kings. I found an appropriate interpretation in the works of Christian scholars. So he's dependent on Christian scholars. Although the Christian scholars make some errors, I will accept the good from them. Okay. So there is no evidence of pre-Porphyry tradition of interpretation. So this is something which came late. By the way, for our own, so to speak, a tradition, there is not one reference, not one even allusion to the history of the Ptolemies and the Seleucids in Ellen White's writing. Okay, so basically, what we have a problem. Okay, we have a problem. Okay, let's have a question on that, and then then for next hour we'll go into the text. All right, let's have a moment of questions and answers. All right, go ahead.
I have two questions. Well, one of them, the first one is from when you said that Jesus was celebrating Hanukkah in John. Where's that?
Oh, I don't know. We are asking that question. There is an allusion. I mean, there when Jesus, for instance, refers to. I'm not saying that he was celebrating Hanukkah. Maybe he was celebrating Hanukkah. He had to because he grew up as a Jew and he celebrated all the feasts of his people. But when, for instance, that story when Jesus refers to the light on the mountain, this is the time of the Hanukkah. according to the chronology. So he's taking that event where they are the celebration of feast of light, right? And so then he says, light, you are the light. You see, so that's what there are several books written on especially the Gospel of John and the festivals. I mean, the Gospel of John is the gospel where you have more references to the Jewish festivals than any other gospels. Now, of course, the book of Revelation is full of references to the Jewish festivals. That's my book. You can see that over there. Okay? All right. Other question?
What response do other conservative scholars tend to give to Matthew 24:15, like you talked about, where Jesus is saying that the abomination of desolation at least hasn't occurred at his point in time in 33, in 31, or so. What response do they give to just, I guess, to just what's the evangelical response to Jesus saying the abomination of desolation hasn't happened while I'm here, so it couldn't be what Antiochus Epiphanes did. So,
well, what I will answer, they will simply tell you that Jesus is not doing history. He's just, they will find a good answer, I think an intelligent one generally. And so, but my point simply is that the testimony of Jesus is to me an indication that of a thinking differently. And so whether the critical scholars do not care about that, because they will say this is not really Jesus who said that. This is a testimony about Jesus saying that. You understand? So this is why you have so many works which have been produced on the historical Jesus, implying that there is a difference between the real Jesus and the Jesus which is, told by the Gospels, by the writers of the New Testament. You have a historical Jesus who may have married even, and you have the Jesus who has been remembered by tradition, Christian tradition. That's the approach of critical scholars. The first one who really initiated the idea of a historical Jesus is a German scholar who actually shook the whole Joachim Jeremias, right, a German scholar, and since that time people are writing about the historical Jesus, sometimes very good, because you can learn from history. But at the same time, they are, of course, questioning the historical truth of the Gospels. And questioning, and they go so far as questioning, really, for instance, the events of resurrection didn't happen. It's only a Christian testimony. So that's the way they will respond. Okay? All right. Shall we have a break on this? Okay? All right, good. Let's have a break. If you look at all the commentaries, there is something going on. It is quite interesting. They all go from the event to the text. There is not one commentary, I can say that without any hesitation, which works on the grammar of the text, and then from the text, Hebrew text, then go after this to the history. What they all do, you just open, I just have a commentary, you can see that, by Zondervan, published. Lucas is the author. It's edited by Walton. You read the commentary. He's just talking on Daniel 11. He's not even talking about the text. And then he says the Ptolemaic and this king and that's the Seleucid. You are completely transported outside of the biblical setting. You are completely dealing with a history that has nothing to do with the biblical heroes. You understand? So you don't have any commentary which really work on the. They cannot. They cannot, because then. So what I'm suggesting, we need to do that. We need to go to the text and get from the text directions, if we can. Pay attention to the literary structure. Pay attention to the plays on word, to the intertextual testimony. You understand what I'm saying? That is the testimony from another text in Daniel, or a testimony from the same chapter, about the same word. Okay? So you need to pay more attention to the text. Have what we call an exegetical commentary, rather than a historical commentary, which is no longer a commentary, which is just a history, which has nothing to do with the text itself anymore. Okay. So the first thing we are going to do is take in consideration the first data which is provided by the book of Daniel itself, and that is the parallel between chapter 8 and chapter 11. Okay? You remember, according to the literary structure of the whole book of Daniel, when you look at the literary structure, you can see already Daniel 8 and 11, these are the two texts which are parallel each other. All right? Now, this is what I have, this is the next thing I have given you. I want you now to look at the next testimony, to look at the parallels between chapter 8 and 11. It's not just that they are parallel because of the literary structure. When you look at them, you will see that indeed they are parallels. The same word, the same echoes, you have the echoes as well. Let's look at this together. All right? And you have the text with you now? All of you? Are you following? All right. These two chapters, that's first observation before we go into the details. I'm just taking consideration what I have written here. You have this written. It is written in your paper. All right, so I'm not going to say something else for the moment. First observation, besides, of course, the parallel which is suggested by the whole literary structure, you look at these two chapters, chapter 8 and chapter 11, which speak about a prophecy, both of them, that is an event which is predicted in the future, and talking about kingdoms, which leads to the end, the time of the end, both. And these two chapters are the only two chapters which describe the course of events in terms of conflict. You see, remember Daniel 2, Daniel 7, you have Babylon. The sequence, the kingdoms are one after the others. Mm-hmm. Daniel 7, kingdom one after the others. Daniel 8, you have Persia and Greece fighting each other. Daniel 11, Persia and Greece fighting each other. So you have already that common point. And of course, these are the only two chapters which we have two kingdoms, no longer four. So in chapter 11, you have exactly the same situation just as you have in Daniel 8. Two kingdoms, not the first kingdom and the fourth kingdom, which is implied. The same situation as in Daniel 8. Okay? In addition to that, you have also the same chronological sequence. Persia, Greece in Daniel 8. In Daniel 11, Persia, Greece. But also in space. If you see the kingdoms, if you look at the movements of these powers, it's quite interesting. In Daniel 8, if you look at that, and you will see that clearly in Daniel 8, you will see east, west, okay, that's the first, and then it goes to north, south, east, and then Tsevi. Tsevi, this is the most beautiful land, which is the promised land. This is really a spiritual language referring to God's people. We will see that in a minute. So what we have here, again, east, west, north, south, Tzevi, and the same in Daniel 11, east, west, north, south, east, Tzevi. Okay. Look at Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, just as in the table as you have it. Second kingdom. Persia, it goes, Persia, east against west. The same in Daniel 11. Persia, east against west. And then third kingdom, Greece, west against east. Third kingdom, Greece, west against east. Then you have four winds of heaven, and also here, four winds of heaven. Then you have, in Daniel 8, fourth kingdom implied, Rome. And because of this, and I will explain that in a minute, I suggest that if you recognize that there is a parallel between Daniel 8 and 11, if it is the case, then since the fourth kingdom is in Rome is implied in Daniel 8, you have to say the fourth kingdom is also implied in Daniel 11, and I will give you some more argument in a minute. Then you have the little horn in Daniel 8, right after this, and parallel at that moment. This whole course, this whole story about the little horn parallels the story of the north and the south. Now, when you look at the moves of the little horn, it's quite interesting. It goes direction of north, then it goes to the south, then it goes to the east, then it goes to the beautiful land. You go the moves of the north. I'm giving you the references. It goes to the north, and it goes to the south, it goes to the east, it goes to the beautiful land. Then the time of the end, it says no hand. It disappeared with no hand. And then 11, it disappeared with no help. The same syntax here. Now look at the introduction. You have exactly, I'm printed that. The same two kingdoms, Persia and Greece. And you look at the way they are written. I'm writing in English here. I'm reading in English. When he became strong, broken, then you have to the four winds of heaven, then you have immediately after that the little horn. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Okay? Look at the way it is in Daniel 11. When he has arisen, I mean, if you look at the Hebrew, by the way, just down here, you have Uche atzmo, Uche amdo, Uche atzmo nishbera, Uche amdo tishaber. You can hear that even if you don't understand. You know, when he became strong, when he has arisen, right? Then it goes to the Le'arba ruchot hashamayim, to the four winds of heaven, and the same exactly in chapter 11, verse 4. And when it was arisen, and it was broken, tishaber, just as you have nishbera, and then you have le'arba ruchot hashamayim, to the four winds of heaven. In other words, what we have right there when we observe here, you have really the reproduction, a replica of language. It's like really repeating the same language. And this is why you have to say Daniel 8 parallels Daniel 11. So you have here Persia, you have Greece, okay? Then you have the four winds of heaven, okay? And then in Daniel, then you have the little horn. You have Persia, you have Greece, you have the four winds of heaven, and then you have the north and the south. So what is the north and the south then?
Little horn.
It is all the time of the little horn. You understand? So this is why I'm saying all what is happening now in the north and the south, and I'm going to give you more arguments to that. For the moment, just the parallel suggests that if you do that, if you recognize the parallel, if you do that, then you have to say, well, if the little horn comes at that moment, after the four winds of heaven, exactly and then repeats after the four winds of heaven, exactly according, then the north and the south, exactly at the same moment, you can say what we are talking about in this whole history of north and south is exactly the history of the little horn. See, so it's not literal. You see, that's to come back to the issue of literal and spiritual. When you talk about here, Persia, Greece, or in Daniel 7, right, Babylon, you know, Persia, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and the same with Daniel. He identified, but as soon as he comes after that, he doesn't identify anymore. Little horn with human eyes, right? Clay. He doesn't even say what it is. We are no longer in a literal realm. We are in a spiritual realm. In other words, it's not that it is not historical, but the power is spiritual. It's no longer a literal kingdom like Persia and Rome. It's a kingdom which exists. It's a power which does exist historically, but has a different nature. It has a spiritual nature, but it has history. Things happened, will happen, there are events. But you cannot interpret now the north and the south and the little horn the same way. You say, well, just as here it's really Greece, really the kingdom of the earth, then here also it's Turkey or Russia or the Muslims. You understand? That's the problem. That's the problem we are having.
So why be literal about the two, the second and the third, but not the first and the fourth?
No, we cannot be literal. As soon as we reach that place here, you see, there is suddenly the language of Daniel is suddenly shift. He is no longer speaking the same way. He's speaking spiritually. Okay? He's no longer identifying this is Persia, this is Greece, this is this king, and so, really identifying. It's a little horn with human eyes, and then he's shocked. And he's spiritual. That's what I'm saying. And so if you recognize that, and by the way, look at how it is a horn with human eyes, human mouth. It's not literal. Did you see a horn with human eyes and human mouth? Only Disneyland does that. Walt Disney does that. It's not what we are talking about. You see, it's not real. Okay? It's interesting. So he has a spiritual language here to refer to a spiritual power. Doesn't mean that it's not historical. You understand? But the power is spiritual. All right? But when he says north, south, north, south, north, south, it's the same kind of language. It's not really, and what is interesting, and we're coming to the north-south. I'm going to do it even by heart because it's very simple. Then first of all, you have begins with what power? Give me the first line of that verse 5.
King of the south shall grow strong.
King of the south attacks north. North attacks south. South attacks north. North attacks south. South attacks north. North attacks south. Did I have to read the scriptures to know that? It's what it is.
Yeah.
How do I know? It's not
Your text.
clear. No, it's very simple. Just as soon as you have the first one, you have the rest.
You're right. You're right.
What I'm saying here, and this repetition of south now, south north, north south, south north, north south, south north, north south, tells you that Daniel is describing a conflict of a different nature than the conflict he was talking about before. It is a spiritual conflict. Again, historical, I will tell you in a minute, but with a spiritual, how shall I say, engine, a spiritual nerve. Okay, so that's what we have here. Now, the main thing, first of all, you realize here is that's what I want you to realize. You cannot ignore that. You cannot ignore that. That parallel. Okay, so. In addition to that, when you look at the language, you look at these stories, and you look particular to the north, the way it is described. The language you find describing the little horn, when you see the little horn which is taking God's place, or the little horn which is persecuting, the same words in Hebrew used for the north here. So this is why the critical commentators, if they say this is Antiochus Epiphanes, this is the Seleucids, they go there, this is Antiochus Epiphanes too. You understand? They are right. I mean, this is consistent. So we have to be consistent and right. Okay, so that's the situation. Now, and of course, as I'm indicating, they go to the same directions, the same conclusion, and in addition to that, see, I'm giving you here, I'm providing, I did a lot of work, as you can see. I tell you, days and nights, while you were having fun. Right? That's where I am. So you better do something in the test, otherwise I'm going to kill you. Because I worked hard. All right, okay. Now my point is this. Now, not only you have all these parallels, language, same words, same grammar, same geometric expression, same exactly grammar. I'm giving you a list of common words, words which are used for the little horn, they are reproduced here. What you find in Daniel 8, again in Daniel 11. Daniel 8, again in Daniel 11. So it's the same drama. That's my point. So I'm giving you a whole list here, right, so that you can see that this is not my delirium. It is right there. Okay, it is right there in the text, in linguistic. Okay, so the main lesson I'm putting now, the main lesson of this parallel concerns the connection between the little horn of Daniel 8 and the North-South wars. That's the main lesson. That's what we understood. Now, look at what I put in bold here. Since the section dealing with the wars between the king of the north and the king of the south is situated, like the little horn in Daniel 8, after the mentioned four winds of heaven, and covers the same time until the time of the end, it follows that the two sections are covering the same history. You understood that.
Yeah.
Point number 2. The parallel between the moves of the king of the north in Daniel 11 and the moves of the little horn, that is, both powers, they go north, south, east, and then promised land, Sevi. So really, you see, describing the same power, the same character, and then they go to the same power. It's the same history. That's the point I'm making. Okay? Right. That's essentially what I'm saying to do to you now. What needs to be done? You see, for several years, I'm just giving you a part of the history of the research. When I wrote about more or less what I share with you, which you could find in my book, more or less, and in a book I had published a number of years ago, which is entitled Daniel, the Vision of the End, published by Andrews University Press. I had observed this, I have added a few things in right now, you heard me, but I had observed the symmetry, the literary connection. That's my training. Pay attention to the literary movement, the symmetry, the principle of regularity, and the poetic dynamic we have. So I had observed that, and I share that. So everyone say, "Oh, there is recognized." The problem is that I never tried to check with history. I said it's spiritual. And so it remained like this. It is only maybe a few months ago that I was challenged, and I decided to work on that with the help of some historians. And I'm just sharing that with you in a very candid way. And the more I went there, the more I was amazed. I'm just giving you my testimony for the moment. We are not going to go to all the details because this is going to be published. It's amazing how it fits with the history of the church, with all the details, from Constantine, Clovis, the Crusades, Inquisition, Bartholomew's Massacre, French Revolution, Napoleon, the Concordant, and so forth. Unbelievable. Henry IV, French, who converted into Christianity, it's all there. It's unbelievable. Okay, I was myself very surprised because I never wanted to see that. Then I started to read the text and say, let's check history. And you know what I did also? Okay, for each interpretation, I'm saying this to you. The book is coming out. There's some as soon as possible. I see you are beginning to want to jump at me. All right. So no, but yeah, it's coming. But you know what is interesting? So you can see that happening. I was about to say something here, but kind of slipped my mind here on the moment. What I was saying, just.
Henry was there.
Hmm?
You were saying Henry was there.
Henry IV.
Hmm?
We left off at Henry IV,
Yes, Henry.
who converted. Or
Uh-huh.
whatever.
Oh yeah, Henry IV. Henry IV. Henry IV. Yes, you know all this. You know, we could verify. All right, we could see that how it it worked and nicely. But anyway, what I would like to share with you, right, is to show you a few things because we don't have time. Well, there are two things I want to. Yes, now I remember my point I wanted to say. Well, that's the point I wanted to say. For each section, which I say, well, this is this line. I'm just giving you an example, okay? Because we cannot go into everything, otherwise it will take at least 3 months doing only that. For each line, the description of the line, we had to go to history and see how this line fits the history. Now the problem, the challenge is that I could also, make my own description of history. That's what that's what they do.
Yeah.
So I will not fall in the same trap which I'm denouncing. So what did I do? This is the discipline. I tell you, this was my wife could testify to that. It was my book, my desk. It's okay now, but it was a time. It was Mount Sinai. Unbelievable, right? I couldn't even find my way there. Okay, and my point is this: I took the discipline. It was the challenge I gave myself, right? To take classic textbooks, books which are recognized by all, simple, not this obscure book, which actually is going to give me reason. It's the only one among the 12, which is then easy to be. I could find always an obscure source which says exactly what I'm thinking because he's crazy as I am, right? So I took the textbook, which is, and I quoted for each interpretation. I took a quotation. You read the quotation and you read the text, and it should fit. Okay. Now, having said that, just kind of a all right. Now this is the time it is coming. Oh, right. Okay. So in other words, tomorrow will take some time. Okay. To quickly, unfortunately, give you an idea of this, a little bit of a foretaste of this, but I could simply tell you at this moment is that you have church history. Basically, what you have in this whole chapter is this. You have, let's see. Yeah, I still didn't give you the structure which I will give you tomorrow, but you have it already there in your thing, okay? I give you already a list, just repeat. You have Constantine, Clovis, the Crusades, Inquisition, Bartholomew's massacres, Renaissance, rationalism, French Revolution, Napoleon, modern times. You can find, and you know what is interesting? They happen at the right moment. You expect to have, this is the time of, this is it. See, it's not just I find it here and there. It follows exactly the chronology. It is amazing, okay? It is really surprising. And I'm still, myself kind of in the expectation here. So what we have here basically, roughly, is that we have some kind of church history from a prophetic point of view, okay? And what you have is you have a description of the history of the church in connection to the state. You remember Daniel 2? The iron and the clay? The connection, the alliance between, you have it there, but more in detail, the connection, so you have some history of alliances between the two. You have also persecution against God's people. So you have, this is what we have in this. Okay, now, what I'm going to show you tomorrow, and perhaps what you could do already for tonight, before tomorrow, look at the two structures which have been shaped and recognized. I'm not the only one on this matter. I mean, these structures have been recognized. Just read this in the course of tonight and the night. Don't sleep. Just look at that. Okay, and then tomorrow we will comment on that, and then we'll go to chapter 12. Go ahead. Let's have your questions. Okay.
Just clarification. Are you talking about page 4? What to read?
I'm talking about the two structures. Okay. So what page is it? It should be page. Let me see. Yeah. All right. Yes. This is page 3 and 4. You see, you have two. This is kind of amazing. You have two different structures. This chapter of Daniel 11 is shaped in two different ways. You can see, and it is beautiful. It is beautiful. All right. So just look at that, and you can even check with your Bible, with the text. And tomorrow we'll come back. Okay. Other questions? No questions. Okay. Good. Tomorrow then.